Hello and welcome to the Society with Fatma Shaheen at PTV World. They say that knowledge is power, and of course when we talk about social media in this regard, it's very important for us to understand the fact that social media, by virtue of giving us unrestricted flow of information and of course by virtue of educating us too, does have the impact to empower us. But having said that, when we talk about social media, it's equally important to also talk about its dark side, and this is something that we'll be doing during the course of today's conversation. At a very basic level, we'll be talking about the merits and of course the demerits of social media as they do stand in the Pakistani society today. We'll also be talking about the impact of social media on our mental health, on family relationships, rather on our very own perception of ourselves. We'll also be delving upon the very important debate, which is of course about social media giving due importance to issues of importance, to topics which were otherwise not talked about, and how that in turn has related to necessary action. This and much more to follow on today's show, that too with a very diverse panel. Let me introduce you to my today's panel. My first panelist for the show today is Maliha Anis Bari. She's a podcaster. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Alongside her, I have Muneeb Qadir, who's an analyst and he's also an educationist. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you for having me.
And my third panelist for the show today is Hareem Naqvi. She's a consultant psychologist. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're most welcome. Now, to get the conversation started with you, I think this is something which I earlier said during the introduction as well, that when we talk about, the overall impact of social media, we understand that at one, end, it of course has had that impact of, connecting us all, removing all the communication barriers. But at the other end, we cannot, of course, ignore the fact that, with, of course, the boom of social media, there has been a greater rise in fake news and misinformation, and by that virtue, more cyber crimes too. So overall, if you were to evaluate the impact of social media, how do you see it impacting us as a society?
Fatma, firstly, thank you for having me over, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about an issue which is a very uprising issue in the society. Social media has had its pros and cons since day one. Since day one, when social media started, we probably did not see it coming as a storm in our lives. But to begin with the pros, yes, I've seen the good part of social media, where, for instance, if I'm asked to help somebody, I would probably just put up a status where I say that so-and-so needs so-and-so help, be it financial, moral, whatever. And people have stepped forward, people have come forward. But at the same time, the negativity that social media has brought in. So for instance, for example, if you're doing a certain trend, and you might be able to really do it because you are a pro at it, I would really want to follow it. I do not care about the consequences, and that is what is scary.
Right, Maliha. On which I'll come to you, Muneeb. I think in this regard, we must also, of course, talk about, the impact of social media on us as people. Now, a lot of people would say that, social media inevitably has had that impact of making us more unsocial, considering that, we now choose to, or for that matter, prefer to communicate with people online rather than, in real life. So, what would your views be on this?
I believe that social media has given us an additional forum on which we can express ourselves, and we have to rise up to the challenges of modern day. So as Aristotle had said that human beings are social animals, so we need to socialize one way or the other. What it's done is that it's brought the society into our rooms, into our private sphere. So we are expressing ourselves throughout the day, around the clock. But yes, to some extent, what you just said does hold true, in the sense that we have an alternative, that, to seek company where we had to step out of the house earlier on. Now we are quite happy staying in our comfort zone, in our cozy rooms, and being able to interact with the world that way. I mean, depends on how you view it. I'm an introvert, so in one way I think it's given me voice, and it's also given me the power to project myself in the way that I want to be perceived by people at large.
I agree with what you said, but at the same time, do you not feel that, we've somewhere lost that human touch, that human element of developing relationships in person? Now, if you were to be living in a house, I see so many people, they would just be communicating by way of social media gadgets, rather than going to the other person's room and actually having a real conversation. So in that regard, I meant, that at the end of the day, I think to some extent it has made us unsocial.
It has, because I do really miss that ability that we had to be able to look at each other in the eye and to talk and to tell one another what we're really feeling, whether it be with friends or family. Whenever I am sitting with them now, everyone is busy with their own devices. And so I think that people also need to chalk this out, that when is it time to actually communicate in person, and when is it time to, you know, express yourselves or communicate with others through your devices. And it just doesn't make any sense to me that when you're sitting on a dinner table, why would you be looking into your phone devices or your, you know,
or even
iPad?
when you're out somewhere, I think people are more connected with their Wi-Fi and with their gadgets and with their phones rather than having a real conversation. But coming towards you, I think it's equally important that we should also talk about the psychological impact of social media. Now, a lot of times we see that social media is accused of, you know, hurting one's mental health. As a psychologist, would you agree?
Well, yes, 100% social media has its pros and cons side by side. So when it comes to the mental health, yes, it's definitely affecting the mental health, and especially of the young adults these days. So every day, you know, patients coming up, clients coming up to us with these problems, they psych themselves into believing that they are not doing better than what others are doing. So this is something which is affecting their mental health to a level where they're having this everyday anxiety, we're having this everyday, you know, compulsive desire to be on the social media.
Which is, I think it's that fear of not missing out, basically, which is very commonly seen in young people, more particularly teenagers. Impacted the way, you know, even people in relationships, they behave, because I think there's too much pressure now to basically make everybody a part of your life, post everything that you are doing. Although, of course, I'm sure you would agree with me on this, that there has to be a very clear demarcation. Now, there are some things which, of course, you can, you know, share in the public space, but then there are some things which are very private and very personal that way. But when we talk about, you know, social media impacting people's mental health, what are the most, you know, common social media anxiety symptoms that you see, more particularly in young people?
Okay, so these young adults these days, they are coming up with this pervasive anxiety of, you know, missing out on specific social media events, missing out on social media trends like that. And it is something which is, you know, every day making them more vulnerable to these mental health problems. Because then they end up into personality crisis, which is something very, which, you know, in long term makes them dysfunctional in their lives. So if we talk about social media, yes, it has given an ability to these young adults to instantly connect with people, maintain relationships, and also being creative at the platform.
Contrary argument as well, that, you know, at one end, whereas of course it helps you connect with people at some level or the other, it also is a catalyst for, you know, making you lose relationships, because when you prefer, you know, using most of your time on social media or on online platforms, some way or the other, you know, you do compromise on your real life relationships, on which I'll come to you. I think podcast is something which is comparatively new in Pakistan, and you've been a trendsetter that way, that, you know, you've been working on this podcast for quite some time now. That too, you know, podcast which is very content specific, which is for the greater good of the society, focusing on such, you know, promotion of such content. So what made you opt for a podcast to start with, considering that, you know, the growing trend now is that of social media influencers and bloggers?
I've been writing, I've been interviewing people, so it's something like Humans of New York that we do, but it's at a very smaller scale because we don't have anything like that in Pakistan. So I started interviewing people from daily walks of life, and from a written page, it all went towards podcasts, and then I wanted to highlight and talk about social causes and social issues that do exist in our society, but at the end of the day, we as human beings, we tend to brush it under the carpet. There's a problem, we look at it, we want to address it, but then we're like, you know what, you know, might as well stay out of it. But why not? Why not? There have been people, I have come across people who I wanted to interview for the longest while, until and unless I did not get the chance or the platform. And when I did, I started interviewing them, and I came across these people who have done wonderful things for Pakistan. And yes, I do agree that podcast is a relatively new field in Pakistan, but these are people that need to be showcased. They have done something.
And I think
for
when
the
it
bigger
comes
cause.
to podcasts, you kind of have a more serious following as you do on Twitter, because you know, I think people who are actually interested in listening to you, who want that interaction, they are the ones who would tune in. Even if you see in the West, especially America, I think now there has been a switch from traditional radio to that of podcast.
And my podcast is a video-based podcast. It's not just an audio-based podcast, it's a video-based podcast. It's just like a show that we're doing, but we're talking about something that can add meaning to the society.
Of course.
I've interviewed people from different walks of society, and trust me, when you look at their lives, when you look at their stories, you would be like, yeah, we are
and
not.
these are the people that we actually need to
highlight.
But Malia, when we talk about, making your mark in the sense, having your USP and not very blindly following trends. So how do you do that? Considering it's such a competitive world, and that, those who are following the trends, they kind of tend to be safe at the end. They know that if not anything, they will get a certain amount of likes or reshares and that validity that they are seeking from social media.
But Fatma, when I started off with my blog as well, I promised myself that I'm not doing it for the likes. Yes, there did come this one time in my life, I had this thing that, oh my God, I think I'm just gonna not be part of that rat race and things are going to finish. And that's where, people like her stepped in. I went to my therapist and I told my therapist, I said, I have a feeler that I don't have enough followers. And she said, okay, fine, I'm not going to give you the answer. You go home and think about it, at what is going to happen. Either you're not going to get the meal that you eat or a sound sleep, or you're going to lose your friends and family because you don't have followers. And then when I started to think about it, I was like, that's okay.
Right.
Because what I'm doing is, I'm doing something for my own betterment and for the society. I don't want followers.
But unfortunately, a lot of people think that way, on which I'll come to you, Muni. But this is something which, of course, you would have your own narrative on, because you've been very actively using social media too. So do you not feel that at some level or the other, in the process of very blindly following all these social media trends, we have made a compromise on creativity, on innovation, on content which we otherwise could have produced, and that too for the betterment of the society?
Absolutely. I do think that when I'm writing a post, for example, and I write a lot of them, I do think of how the audience are going to perceive it. So I have to keep it short, even though the thing that I'm trying to say cannot be said in just a few lines. But somehow, people, either they tend to have low attention span, or social media has made them such. So I have to keep it very, very concise, like 1 or 2 lines only. But that way you do not get to convey what you're really trying to say. And yes, there is that pressure of keeping up with the trends, the hashtags. One has to do that nowadays. For instance, wedding dances and their videos are quite a thing. One way it's a good thing, because it's made the star system, so to speak, more democratic. Everyone has gotten a platform where they can showcase their talent, where they can showcase, whatever they have to offer. But at the same time, I think that a lot of the content that we're seeing is just clickbait. And so that is where people are going to go on to all kinds of extremes, even dangerous extremes, to get those likes, to get those followers, and to get those clicks. And, that is another area where I think she has the expertise, but I can tell from a social media user's point of view, I think that it has had a negative impact on people and their minds as well. Because now you are measuring your success. It's become a new barometer in terms of how many followers you have, in terms of how many likes you have. I look at all these vloggers, as they call it. And in each of their videos, they say, do not forget to subscribe. It just looks like they're begging for the numbers. And when you look at things in terms of numbers rather than the content itself, I think that the quality of your content is going to be compromised in the process.
Mani, your point is noted, on which I'll come to you. Harim, I think in this regard, we must also talk about the dark side of social media, that in, of course, the course of basically educating people, we've also seen that it also puts a lot of pressure, more particularly on young people and teenagers, especially when it comes to, them being able to acquire unrealistic beauty standards. So as a psychologist, what kind of an impact does it have on our youth?
Well, yes, nowadays I believe social media is riddled with unrealistic beauty standards and especially expectations related to the body image. And when it comes to these young adults, these teenagers, they take it, they take their social media profiles, their content very seriously. So, they are basing their everything on that social media profile. So when it comes to this body image and beauty standards, so basically your body image is based on 4 psychological aspects. That is your perception, how you see yourself. Then it is your affect, that how you feel about yourself, what you like and dislike about yourself. Then it's cognitive, that what do you think about your own self. And then it is the action, the behavior, that what do you do for your appearance. And a lot of them are going, if we see the behavior, a lot of them are going for these aesthetic surgeries and whatnot these days.
I think one way or the other, social media has actually led to a boom of more people, now resorting to plastic surgeries or even cosmetic aesthetic treatments.
It's become a sort of an obligation, I feel. each individual's choice how they want to look, whether they want to go under the knife, whether they want to get Botox done or whatnot. But now it's become like a checklist.
Right.
That if you haven't complied with those beauty standards, and by the way, that also goes for men. So there's something known as the gym body. So you need to have that. I've faced the pressure myself a lot of times. You know, I've got my friends recommending me or people on social media writing me that you need to build biceps or this or that. But I think for me, at least, on a very subjective level, that's a very unhealthy choice to make.
Right.
Because yes, exercise is good. Yes, you know, being up and about is good.
Of course.
But the fact that you need to have a 6-pack or an 8-pack abs just for the sake of it, I really don't think that that's natural.
That's very right. On which I'll come to you basically. I think in this regard, we must also of course talk about the very important role of, you know, parents and education institutions working in collaboration with mental health care professionals. And this is something that, you know, we see in different jurisdictions all over the world. Parents, they are very particularly guided about, you know, the kind of content they should expose their children to. So why do we not see this happening in Pakistan?
Fatma, one of the things that I think is of note, it has to be noted over here, is that a lot of parents, because since I'm in the education sector, I look at children and I don't blame the parents at some point, because a lot of parents are working parents, right? Now those who are working have nannies who look after their children. Not a lot of children are looked after by their grandparents or some khala or some aunt or somebody, you know. So most of them are looked after by their nannies. Now if the child is in grade 1 or even lesser than that, that child might not have a smartphone or an iPad or a tablet, but the nanny will have. And through that, the nanny will give access to the child to a world that is completely unknown to the child, right? I have come across students who often come in the morning and they're crying. And when you talk to them, they might not know what the problem is, but then later in the day, they'll come back to you and they'll tell us that, oh, you know, it's been 3 days, I haven't seen my mother. And you have that state of shock that why did not the child get to see the mother for 3 days? Then when you figure out that, oh, because the mother is working, the time gaps are very different. The mother comes home at 7 o'clock, and by that time, the child is either going to bed or has already gone to bed. Now, this is one of the impacts that social media has had on us, that as a family where we were, you know, where we were one unit, now we're basically bound into different rooms with different gadgets around us, and we do not know what is happening in our lives. Rather, we would rather know that, okay, fine, what is happening in Fatma Shaheen's life, but I would not know what is happening in my mother's life.
Right. And so I think by that yardstick, then you would agree with me on the fact that when we talk about social media impacting the society, it does have a negative impact on not only the social fabric of the society, but also in the way the family relationships are now, basically. Munib, I'll come to you in this regard. I think parents being there, regardless of their work responsibilities or anything for that matter, being there to basically guard and of course guide the children so as to be able to use, you know, social media and media in a way which is of course safe for them, because a lot of times we see that, you know, a lot of incidents happen and, you know, children, they get to know people, they are more prone to falling victim to cyber crimes that way, just because there is a lack of parental check on them. So how do you feel can this issue be overcome?
You know, with the advent of social media, parenting has become a very challenging, complex balancing act. That in one sense, you have to give your child the freedom that they can explore the world themselves, and you know, social media is a part of the modern world in this day and age. But at the same time, I mean, a parent would be scared. Who is my child interacting with? You know, because internet has given anonymity to so many people. Your child could fall prey to, I don't know, which kind of criminal, for example. They might be communicating on Facebook or social media or on Twitter with, you don't know who's behind the computer screen. So you want to monitor what your child is doing, what content they are consuming. Maybe they're not having access to obscene material or violent material, because there had been games a few years ago where people had were risking their lives and playing with their lives. So I think that there need to be some parental controls or parental checks that, you know, parents need to be given so that they can monitor that the children are using social media responsibly and in a way which is conducive to education. Because, you know, I would like to add, as an educationist, I've seen that myself, that somehow with the coming in of, you know, information technology and the internet, students have lost touch with textbooks.
Right.
When I, as a teacher, I get to mark my students' assignments, I somehow see that they have taken material completely from some internet source and then they've put it in a paraphrasing tool.
Right.
And from an educational point of view, because our kids, they have lost originality of thought. And in the end, you know, the quality of work that I have to mark, it just loses its meaning because you've tried to add in synonyms to the original text, and it just does not make any sense. But at the same time, not in such a manner so as to compromise their child's security and safety, because you don't know who your child is interacting with. What internet has done is it's given anonymity to so many people.
Right.
So who is that person that your child is communicating with in their Facebook Messenger or their Instagram DM, for example?
And so many children have gone missing. They've actually left their houses.
Absolutely.
They've
Because
gone
what
married
happens
people
is
against their parents' wishes.
They find some friend online, and that friend invites them to meet at a certain spot. After that, you don't know where your child might go.
Right,
So
basically.
that's really scary. And in addition, I also feel there has been a very negative impact on the development of children's mind in terms of cyberbullying.
Right.
You know, your child is being shamed or either in relation to their body or in relation to the way they talk or the way they look. And children, a lot of times, they internalize the criticism that they receive,
right.
and they don't share with their parents out of a sense of embarrassment and shame.
Exactly.
So we need to be able to, you know, bridge this communication gap with our
between the
children.
parents and children. That's very rightly put by yourself, and I think she would have a perspective on this too, because, you know, we see that social media, it has that potential to, of course, you know, boost your confidence, give you that, you know, kind of a morale boost in the sense that, you know, you look good, you post your selfies, but at the same time, when you're out there in the online spaces, there's a lot of room for you to be bullied, or for that matter, even cyber harassed. So as a psychologist, how can one ensure that at one level you use social media for a good purpose, for an educational purpose, something which gives you personality or character boost, but at the same time, this is done in a way which is not destructive for you as a person?
Okay, firstly, I would like to add the comment on what Munib said about parenting is becoming very difficult these days because, you know, everyday parents are coming to us with their, you know, teenagers, and they're having these different sort of problems, insecurities, complexes. You know, they have this specific expectations and, you know, for the lifestyle they want, and it is a constant pressure on the parents as well. And definitely it is because of the repeated social media exposure that they are having. And like we discussed, you know, prior as well, that in-person conversation, socialization is becoming very less.
This is exactly why I said that, you know, social media is something which has made us more unsocial. But I understand, you know, where you're coming from. But moving on, when we talk about, you know, striking that particular balance between using social media so as to boost one's personality, one's confidence, or even for that matter, you know, maybe working on your business, because we see a lot of entrepreneurs actually starting up their businesses in online spaces, but at the same time doing it in a manner which is not destructive neither for oneself nor for the society at large. So how particularly do you feel can that balance be struck?
Yes, I feel because as we know that the social media is the new tool to stay connected and to be creative and whatnot. So it's very important, like our own lifestyle management and so much other management that we do in our lives, we need to have a social media management for ourselves as well. So it's very important to limit the social media time that you are having every day.
Right, Hareem, your point is noted. And I think on this you would also want to add something, because, you know, there's this rampant problem of fake news, as we all understand. And this is something which is just not common to the Pakistani society. We see this world over. I was reading this report which actually suggested the fact that, you know, in America, when the US elections happened, 66% of the Americans, they were very worried about the fact they were being fed fake news, and they were so anxious about, you know, what the future of the country would be. So how do you feel can we overcome this problem? Is it by virtue of stricter regulation of laws and of policies, or do you feel that at a very basic level the society needs to self-regulate?
Social media is a very useful platform where you are changing the status quo as well. That's where activism also comes in. But I understand fake news is a huge concern at the same time. We've seen that during the COVID-19 pandemic as well. That people were, you know, the anti-vaxxers, the anti-vacciners, they were asking people not to get vaccinated. Social media has become a battleground for narratives. And so people, in order to promote their narrative, are going to promote all sorts of misinformation. And unfortunately, I've seen that a lot of internet users, they do not take steps in verifying that whether the information they're receiving is accurate or not. It's just that one clickbait headline, and it can literally, you know, ruin your perception of the world. So I keep on encouraging people to first of all just don't look at the headline which is being presented in front of you.
Right, Muneeb. But coming to in this regard, I think something which Muneeb also earlier said, I think the focus should be the way we behave, on the way we actually basically, reshare content that we come across in the social media world. So do you not feel that when it comes to, of course, taking on responsibility, the responsibility here also lies on people who are in positions of power, be it journalists, be it social media influencers, or even bloggers?
Look, Fatma, I agree completely that social media itself is a responsibility of the entire nation. What we want to share or reshare or tag somebody can have deeper consequences and diverse and very, serious consequences on someone's life, right? We just share to share. We don't share to read it. A lot of times, I myself, if I tell you, I would probably DM you an article and then save it for myself later to read. But how later that is going to be, I don't know. And, I always say that before sharing it, at least go through that link like he said. But maybe you're supposed to go through that link because you just don't know how impactful that is going to be for the other person's life. Be it a podcaster, be it a politician, be it a journalist, be it anybody, a blogger. When we are sharing, we are not looking at, a lot of times we are not looking at what we are sharing. We're looking at the numbers and the times it has been shared.
Exactly.
We would not know what happens. To the extent, as you said, that while COVID was going on, so many people were declared dead. Later on, they literally raised from the ashes.
And I remember there were so many myths about, how you can recover very quickly. Although medically, they were actually declared to be very kind of detrimental for oneself, following those traditions. I think in this regard, it's also very important to explore the psychological impact of information warfare and, of course, by that virtue, fake news too. So what kind of an impact does fake news have in people who do come across it? Because a lot of times we see that, when people read news which is fake and which is wrong, they also become, more depressed reading it, or they become more anxious. And this is something that we often don't talk about.
Okay, so the first thing is the psyche behind sharing the false news. So again, it's where the pervasive anxiety is coming, that, you want to be included. So if somebody is sharing something, if I wake up and I see a post coming from, I'll be like, okay, if this is the headline today, and if Fatma is sharing this, I should be sharing it again. And then, somebody else is viewing my story and that person is sharing it again. So basically, that is the mindset that, you want to be included. You want to be there, that, okay, I also know this, this current news. I'm also aware of this fact. And when it comes to the mental health, yes, it's affecting our mental health to an extent where we're becoming dysfunctional every day, because that false news is somewhere affecting you. So you are at your workplace, you are at your, you're busy with your work and all that, and you're coming up with different false news. It's somehow affecting everyone around the globe, with that. So it is something that everybody needs to take responsibility of their own social media use. So every day when you wake up, the most important thing for you is to check your social media, to check your Instagram, to check Twitter, or to check whatsoever social media platform you're using. So, that fake news is somehow affecting you. It is making us dysfunctional every day. It's becoming a hurdle in our work.
I think it's also creating more anxiousness and anxiety, especially if you come across something which you actually has kind of an impact on you, on your real life that way. But coming towards you and moving towards the end of the show, I think in this regard, we must also, of course, talk about the very pivotal role of advertising agencies, of advertisements, so to speak, because, promoting the right kind of advertisement. So in this regard, what would your recommendations be? What would your proposals be when it comes to ensuring that, advertising agencies and advertisements per se, they play their due role when it comes to socially, basically, marketing their products?
More than the advertising agencies or the marketing companies, I think more than that, the brands need to know that what they're looking at and how they are affecting the masses. For instance, if there is a tea brand, be it whatever, red or blue or pink or yellow, doesn't really matter, but whatever they are targeting to a certain niche of their market, right? The red tea might want to target a certain niche, the yellow tea might want to target a certain niche. But then at the end of the day, they also need to know that they are making a competitive world for everybody out there. If I cannot afford the red tea, I would definitely want to maybe take some money from you as loan, and I would want to buy it, right? But then they are not giving us the pros and the cons of the tea. Okay, over drinking tea can affect you, under drinking tea can affect you, or maybe just not having tea at all can, you know, what are
But
the
I think the
consequences?
responsibility then multiplies when you are actually selling off products which are injurious to one's health.
Fatma, how big is that disclaimer? That disclaimer is so tiny that even if I take a microscope, I don't think I can read it, right?
But the question then is that do you see these disclaimers being reflected when it comes to social media? Because I feel there the ground is more open, it's more
ground
fluid.
is very open.
Exactly,
and
which is why we need greater reinforcement.
Yes,
here.
the ground is much open, and then there is no reinforcement, then there is no check and balance. Especially when it comes to social media, there is no law that is, you know, being abide, right? And for example, as I was saying that agar we look at these energy drinks, there is no rule, there is no regulation about an energy drink or its consumption. I have seen, as an educationist, I have come across my students who are consuming energy drink to the extent that it is scary. And when you talk to them, they're teenagers. They'd be like, woman, what is your problem? You're in your late 30s, early 40s. Why are you looking at me like that? You must have done it. No, but we did it while we had check and balance. At some point in time, our parents had that. And when it comes to the advertising agencies, they need to be more responsible, I think. They need to give that disclaimer maybe little
This is exactly why I posed that question. Munisa, coming towards you and moving towards the end of the show, now we understand the fact that, you know, social media has opened up, you know, room for discussion for so many conversations that we didn't have. We've also seen, and if we see internationally, it has also given a lot of basically support to movements like Black Lives Matter and then the Me Too movement, and then also the climate change movement, which was actually led by Greta Thunberg, I remember. But at the end of the day, are we moving forward from just advocating for these causes to doing something which is actually concrete? Because, you know, activism per se in itself, it's just not enough.
The thing is that for every Black Lives Matter movement, for every Greta Thunberg's climate justice movement, there are also counter narratives in which can sometimes turn either extremely dangerous or very violent. And I do see, you know, the irresponsibility with which social media users are using the internet, particularly the far right-wing groups, to finally find a voice. And that way they have penetrated into every single household in the world. And I believe that you know, the kind of activism, so-called, that we do that we see on social media, it's not always positive, it's not always good. A lot of times it's people's lives at risk. We were also talking about the psychological impact of social media. I can tell you that because a lot of times I engage in very uncomfortable discussions, things that the society would want to, you know, brush under the carpet. I have myself seen this phenomenon of trolling, and I am at the receiving end of it. To say that it has not had any psychological impact on me or any adverse effect on my mental well-being would be a lie. It has had that.
Right.
So we need to keep in mind the fact that there needs to be regulation from the social media companies as well. That when someone is telling you, when an internet user is telling you that a particular hashtag trend could cost people or certain communities their lives, prompt action needs to be taken by the social media companies.
And this is something that we have seen in other countries. I remember there was this case in Germany which happened, you know, following the very strict regulation of the media, especially when it comes to regulating hate speech and misinformation, so to speak. And there was this company which was actually fined, I remember, $57 million just because they failed to do that. So I think at the end of the day, whereas of course we are talking about regulating ourselves, I think it's equally important that the law enforcement, the checks and balances, they also kick in.
And something known as corporate social responsibility. These companies are earning millions of profits. That's the least that they owe to their users.
Yes.
So we need to create safe online spaces. And just one final point I would like to add is that, you know, life is a mixed bag of hits and misses. What we people are doing, at least what I'm doing, is I'm only posting the hits of my life, you know. I'm not telling people what I've missed out in life. So I would like to ask everyone not to envy me when they see me on social media, because somehow we are creating distorted images of ourselves.
What people don't understand is that, you know, not everything that you see on social media, not everything that you see glittering is of course gold. On that I'll come to you, and I think in this regard your narrative here is extremely important, that, you know, considering that we live in such a fast-paced world, and, you know, considering we are also addicted to social media and of course our gadgets, how then do you feel can we strike that balance between using media for constructive purposes, perhaps to educate ourselves, but at the same time not use it, you know, to get to us?
Yes, when it comes to social media use, it's also somewhere become, you know, it's because of the social media use, we are becoming emotionally isolated, which is something very dangerous for our mental health. It is something which is an early sign leading towards long-term depression. So when we talk about this emotional isolation, it's when we become emotionally numb. It's when we are becoming detached from our real world environment and our real reality-based surroundings. We are more consumed in our, social media life, which is somehow very much toxic for us now.
Exactly.
So it's very important to know that, you need to be following or viewing the content which is productive for you, which is, which is somehow adding something to your life.
But here it's very important, Hareem, and I would want you to deliberate on this for basically the benefit of the audience, that when we talk about, steering ourselves clear from not very religiously following trends, what is it that we need to do? What are the tips that you would want to give to people out there? Because you see, all these issues, they are interrelated at the end of the day.
Yes. Okay, so firstly that, that just Muneeb just mentioned that social media is a false reality. So everything that we're seeing is just a trailer of the good part of people's life. There's nothing bad. They're not showing you the dark side of their life. So don't have this perfect, expectations of a relationship, of a lifestyle, or of a family. It is something which is very destructive. So because all of those are just false expectations, and they are something which are making us experience these exaggerated and imagined flaws in ourselves, in our lifestyles.
Right. One thing I'd like to add over here as well, the fact that I live with my parents, and my parents are not young, of course, they're pretty old, and when I look at them and when I look at their friends who come over, a lot of times, I myself, I think I would also blame myself for something like this, but they're very lonely. And just this morning, I was talking to one of my sister-in-laws, and we came to this conclusion that they're lonely. They feel very lonely. Why? Because I, as a human being, and 10 other people in the household are all busy with our own gadgets, right? They, as oldies, if you want to call them, they're in their late 60s, late 70s, even some of them are in their late 80s. They are lonely because they're used to people sitting in one room. I know what's happening in Fatma Shaheen's life. I know what is happening in your life. They know what is happening in my life. We also know that what is happening in the neighbor's life, right? They are very lonely, and that's something that we owe them.
And you wanted to add something to that, right?
Our younger generation needs to understand, actually older as well, that we need to stop looking at our lives from the lens of our mobile camera. Start learning, start learning to live in the moment itself. What happens is there's this mentality, this new psyche that if I didn't take a selfie, it didn't really ever happen.
And whatever is happening in your life, you have to ensure that it does go on your social media.
You have to document it all the time.
You have to document it all. Your point is noted, on which note I would like to conclude today's show. Thank you so much, Maliha. Thank you so much, Muneeb. And thank you so much, Hareem, for joining us today. Well, to conclude today's show, we generally spoke about the changing and of course the ever evolving and very dynamic nature of social media, and of course social media trends by that virtue, whereas of course we cannot deny the fact that social media has had that impact of connecting us all, removing all the communication barriers. What we cannot also forget is that at some level or the other, social media has made us more unsocial. In that regard, it's also very important to remember the fact, and of course teach our young generation, that when it comes to using social media, this must be done in a more responsible and of course in a more constructive manner, because as they very famously say that with great power comes great responsibility, and as a society we need to enforce this in letter and spirit as well. On that note, signing off for today. Until next time, take care and Allah Hafiz.